All right, it's time for Session with Sam, and it's governance time. Who's excited? Who's excited? Governance is on the top of the list of all conversations at the water cooler, at the pool, at the dance club, whatever. I know you're excited. Look, it is time for Sessions with Sam. I'm Eric Johnson. I got my Diet Dr. Pepper. I got my Serverless for Everyone Yeti. It must be time to start. So I am glad you are here. Who's out there? If you're here, give me a hey, give me a hello, just to see who's with us today. Excuse me. Rob Sutter, you with us? I don't know if Rob Sutter's joining us today, but he is my moderator extraordinaire. So we'll see what's going on there. All right. So let's get started. So like I said, we're going to be talking about governance, and this is the second session of 4. Count them, 4. Real quick, I'm going to do the rules because I know if you've been watching this show, you see me do this a lot, but there's basically 3 rules when I'm talking. Number 1, this is any number I want it to be. So, if I hold up 1 and say 7, I mean 7. These are quotes, not apostrophes. This looks better than this anytime. So, there you go. And these are thumbs. So I'll do that a lot, and I do it in camera and stuff. And people go, that's not a 7. So it is a 7 today, but actually it's a 4. So this is one of 4 that we're doing. I guess my man Rob Sutter is not with us today. That's okay. He's got his own stuff to do. So that is all right. But I want to make sure. Hey, there's John Walsh. Hey, John Walsh. Everybody can hear us. John's coming in from Twitter. This is going out on, he's coming in from YouTube. This is going out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and even my Facebook. How crazy is that? So if you're watching, wherever you're at, welcome to us. All right. So let's get started. First of all, let's kind of do a recap of what we talked about last week. Last week, when we look at governance, and the idea of governance is the ability to know what's going on in your account, right? It's the ability to say, hey, I know that this is happening, and I get alerts when configuration changes are made. I'm going to get alerts across AWS. So if the service is supported by AWS Config, and that's the service we're talking about, AWS Config, then we can monitor it. So as changes are made, AWS Config records those changes, and then you can see a dashboard. And we'll go through the dashboard in just a few minutes to kind of take a look and see how that works. All right, so last week we showed how in SAM, in fact, I'm going to pull up that template real quick so we can see it. We showed in SAM how to set up, the actual, just kind of the infrastructure, the recorder, and different things like that. So let me bring that screen up real quick here. All right, so if we take a look at this, what we've got here is we'll walk through. We set up our bucket to store all our data. We set up our notification topics to get notifications on when stuff is sent out. We set up our delivery channel. This is how we route stuff. So when things happen, I want the data to go to an S3 bucket, and I want data to go to an S3 or an SNS topic arm. We set up our recorder. And this is actually the recorder will actually, this is what monitors everything. Now, the interesting thing about the recorder, and when we get into kind of the advanced topic of this a couple of weeks, the recorder can record multiple things. So we can say, hey, just record everything, or I want you to record very specific resources. So it makes sense. Here's a note to take. If you're just working with serverless or just a certain subset of AWS services, just limit it to those. There's no sense recording everything, right? Let's not put things out that shouldn't be out there. So you can actually set a list of the recording. Finally, we give it the role, the config role, to do all the work. And this allows us to write to SNS, to write to the bucket, different things like that. So that's what we did. And that was actually 2 weeks ago. If you were here last week, we kind of did an interruption, and we talked about the HTTP APIs direct integrations. If you missed that, that's a really interesting topic where we actually show how to do HTTP API directly to SQS, Event Bridge, and step functions, app config, and the final one has jumped out of my head real quick. It'll come back around to Event Bridge, SQS, step functions. Someone else throw it out there if they have it. It'll come back to me. So there's 5 services that we directly integrate with right now. And it's, Kinesis is the other one. There it is. All right, so let's go over to today's topic. So today, we're going to be talking about managed AWS rules on API Gateway. All right, so there's 2 types of rules that we can do. How many? Two. All right, there you go. Good. If you follow the rules, my rules, there you go. There's two types of rules that we can do. The first is an AWS Managed, where this has all kind of been set up and configured by AWS. The second is a custom. And a custom means, hey, I'm going to watch for recordings, and then I'm going to write the logic to make sure what I want on that service is there. And that we use a Lambda function to do that. And we'll talk about that next week, because that's pretty in depth. So we'll jump into that next week. But let's talk about managed ones today. And this today will probably be one of the lighter ones we do, but it's good to kind of have this under your belt to kind of understand how this works. So first of all, I want to jump over here so you can see it, and I'll post this as well. So we're going to go to this page right here, and this is a list of all the AWS Managed Rules. And I'm going to post this link in our chat so you have it. And the reason you want this is, like anything else with AWS, see if we're already doing it for you before you do it on your own. Okay, just a general rule. See if you're already if we're already doing it. Don't reinvent the wheel. And that can, I see people writing their own authorization instead of using API Gateway. I see people using their own queuing systems instead of using SQS, MQ, whatever, different things like that. So the same thing here. There's a huge list of pre-built managed rules. And so you can go in here and say, hey, I want to make sure, let's just look at Lambda. So I'm just going to do a simple Control F on this. And look, there's several Lambda rules already in place for Lambda functions. So Lambda concurrency check, Lambda DLQ check, Lambda function public access prohibited, Lambda function settings check, and the Lambda inside VPC. So you may not use these, but these are a good place to start. And there's just a ton of them here. Okay, so I posted the link there so you can get an idea of where that, where to look. Hopefully that's big enough. Anybody let me know. You can throw in a text if it's not big enough. I'm glad to blow it up. I will throw this out there. This is pretty exciting. Get ready for governance. I know, I'm going to take a pause here. I know governance is not the most exciting thing in the world. I get that. But as companies grow, right, and even small companies, two-person companies and 10-person companies and 3,000-person companies and 400,000-person companies, governance is not necessarily restriction. Governance is, here's the best way to do it. Here's the way that these should be done. And if it's not, if you're out of compliance, we need to know why. And there are some things you go, okay, that's okay. That can be out of compliance. And we'll talk about applying these rules kind of in a filter that way in a little bit. But governance is important. If you're not doing governance in your company, I would look at it. Two of the services that I often talk about, people go, what? I haven't heard of those. Number one is AWS Config, like we're talking about, and the other is AWS Catalog. And AWS Catalog allows you to say, this is the way a template should be built in our company. This is the way a service should be launched in our company. So again, we're talking about AWS Config today, and we're going to talk about managed rules. So let's jump into that. I've done, given kind of the overview, so we'll actually jump into some code here. So let's go back here. Hopefully that is big enough. Please let me know if it is not. So here's what we're looking at. In fact, you don't need to see my face, so we'll just blow that up a little bigger. So here's what we're looking at. It's pretty straightforward, okay? So the first one I'm going to do is what's called an API Gateway Logging Rule. And the actual name, and I grabbed it from that page we're just looking at, is the API Gateway Execution Logging Enabled. That's the resource name or the source identifier. Okay, and so the purpose of this rule is just simply to make sure if an API gateway has been created, it should have execution logging enabled. If it's not, then it will be out of compliance. All right, so let's walk through the different parts of this. First of all, whatever type, we're declaring what it is, config rule. Okay, the description, that's fine. Now, there's this thing called a maximum execution frequency. Right. And so the way that I've got it turned off right now because it's just going to go with the default, which is 24 hours. The maximum execution frequency works with when I'm setting up my config, and these configs are driven. The managed configs are done on a periodic basis. I can say, hey, I want you to do it every 1 hour, 6 hours, 3 hours, 12 hours, so on and so forth. Right? Or 24 hours, which is the default. Okay, so I've left mine to the default. But if you need those checks, if you have a lot of changes going on, a lot of config stuff, and you want those checks more frequent, then you can certainly up those. Now be careful, if you're managing a lot of resources and hitting it every hour, you want to make sure that makes sense, right? Okay. So the second thing we're going to talk about is the scope. Now, there's a couple of things to know about the scope, okay? So the first thing is we can scope it by compliance resource types. So the compliance resource types is very simple. It says, hey, what are the resource types? And these are gonna have a 1-to-1 ratio to CloudFormation resources, right? So we're using that same resource name. So in this instance, both my API Gateway and API Gateway v2, and if you're not familiar with those really map to, this is API, and this will be HTTP API. So we use the moniker v1 or no version, and then v2 because these are both REST APIs, right? So in this, I'm going to say anytime a change is made on an API Gateway or an API Gateway v2 stage, I want you to record the changes. Now, the other way I can do it is by a compliance resource ID, and that's literally just the ID of the resource, and you can grab that from the resource. And then there's the other thing is a tag and a key and value. So this is kind of interesting. So you say, you know what, I only want to do it. I only want to record resources that have a tag of record and a value of yes, please. I don't know. You can do whatever you want. So you can actually use the tags to say record this or record that. Kind of limit. Now you can't say, what's kind of interesting is you can't do it kind of a not tag, right? So I can't say I want you to record every API Gateway and every API Gateway v2 stage, but do not record anything tagged with this. Okay, so it's only but you can't even have a compliance resource type and a tag at the same time. So these are ORs: compliance resource ID, or tag key and tag value, or compliance resource types. There you go. Now, an interesting thing to note on this, and we're going to launch this, take a look at what it looks like in a few minutes. But an interesting thing to note is under my template here, if you watched the session 2 weeks ago, we talked about setting up our recorder. Now, I want to talk about this a little more in depth at the moment. Okay, so in this, we're doing a couple things. So with two flags, we're saying we're going to say all supported, or include global, and include global resource types. And we're doing a Boolean to say if this is my main region, then grab all the resource types, things like that. And I explained that in depth in the first part of this little series. But I also explained that you could list, in fact, just a few minutes ago, I explained that you could list the resources that are being recorded. Now, if you go that option, if I do not have API Gateway and API Gateway v2 stage listed in this, if I'm making a list, then this will not work because your recorder's not recording anything. All right, so be aware of that when you're setting this up. If you're going to list those granularly, you need to list them in the compliance resource type here as well. All right, so last thing we're going to do, okay, the owner is we put AWS for managed resources. We put AWS, and then the source identifier, like I explained, is API Gateway execution logging enabled. Now, I have two other rules that we're going to launch here. The first is the S3 no public read rule. And this means, hey, I don't want to see any public read on a bucket. That's a good thing, right? A quick aside, buckets should never be publicly accessible. The information in them can be accessible, but let's keep the buckets locked down, right? So you keep that granular. You don't just say, hey, this is wide open, right? In fact, at Amazon, if I do that, I'm going to hear from somebody, right? So if I pop this on my account, it'll notify me before anybody else says, hey, you got a public account or public bucket. The other thing is I have a no public write rule. These are separate, right? So I can say, yeah, I want it to be public readable, but not public writable. Now, in my case, I want to do both. I want to lock down both. All right. So we do a SAM deploy. And now in this case, I've already done the SAM deploy. I actually did it yesterday. And the reason for that is, we don't need the template. The reason for that is because I wanted it to, record some information. I didn't want you to have to sit here and watch me as it was recording information. So what we can do is we can pop over. So if you've never seen the show before, if you've never seen the series, SAM deploy is literally, that's going to deploy the template out into the AWS cloud. It's going to build all my infrastructure. In this case, it's just going to add these rules to AWS Config. And these are going to work because I've already set up the underlying infrastructure 2 weeks ago when we did the first show. Now, one thing to also be aware of, if I were to combine the API Gateway logging rules, or these managed rules, and the recorder, building the recorder in the same template, the recorder has to be built first. This is one of those rare places where, and I'll talk more about this when we combine the whole template in a couple weeks, where we use this depends on. Okay, and then I would depend on something else in the template, and that would require it to build that resource first. Okay, so enough of that. So we do a SAM deploy. I can do a SAM deploy minus G if this is the first time deploying. So over here, you can see, or I've did deploy actually earlier. So let's go to the config console. Now, real quick, I'm gonna look to see if we have any questions. I've been doing a lot of talking this time, but I want to see, doesn't look like we have any questions on config at the moment. So, all right, okay. Feel free, and I really encourage you. Feel free to post your questions in the chat. And if you have questions you want to put here, put them into Twitter. Catch me on EDJ Geek on Twitter, and I'll be glad to answer questions. Config is a complex setup. It's not by design, but it's almost impossible not to be complex. You're doing a lot of work right here. So hit me if you have questions. I'm certainly not an expert, but I've been wrestling with it for a while, or I can connect you to the right folks. All right. Okay. So let's move into the dashboard and kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. So this is my console that I'm looking at. And what you're seeing here is I've got, and this is just my dashboard, and it's telling me, hey, you've got some compliant and non-compliant resources, right? So we can kind of jump in here to see what we've got. All right, so first of all, let's go to rules. Okay, looks like we have a non-compliant rule, account config managed rules, API gateway. Oh yeah, all right. So to read this chart, I need this. This is telling me of the rules, of the 3 rules I have out there, 1 rule has some non-compliance on it. And of all the resources I've recorded, 16 are non-compliant. And the rule that they're coming up in is the account, the logging. My execution logging is not turned on. So you can kind of see what we've got here. And it lists all the different ones that are non-compliant. So, and you can see, so REST APIs are REST APIs, and then down towards the bottom, we have just APIs, and those are going to be HTTP APIs, but you can see a better, here's the V2 stage. So let's go into this. Now, some of these I've had launched for a long time, so we can kind of get an idea here. But what's really cool here is I can go in here and I can say, all right, I've added the rule, it's done some recording, let's take a look. First of all, here's that resource ID, and that's going to be an ARN. Okay, so like I said, when you're targeting a resource ID, you can just put a specific ARN for the API gateway. All right, and then we can go down here and we can look at again, here's the rule that's been done. So one thing we can do is we can look at the configuration timeline. So I'm going to click in that, and this is going to tell me, hey, here's when changes were made. And here's what happened. So I can go back here. You see where I removed recording and added recording as I was building these out. So you still got these records in the bucket, but I may have stopped recording, added recording. This is me learning how to do this so I could do this show, right? Okay. So then what I can do is I can go back and I can see the first time, that looks like that's the first time I recorded data was on the 15th of May. So on the 24th of May on this particular API, I had some changes. Okay, so you can see real quick here, here's what I did. Here's the initial, so I had no settings in the method settings, and I added all these settings, right? And then the configuration setting, what used to be false, I changed it to true, and the last updated, that just makes the changes and kind of get an idea of when that happened, right? So that gives you an idea. I can quickly come in here and go, what was changed? What were they doing? What happened, right? There are some CloudTrail events. This is kind of old, so I'm not gonna see the 90 here, but we could see that if this were newer. I made some other changes that day. Looks like just literally. Oh, you can see I was working way too early in the morning, 2:22 a.m. Not uncommon for me. Okay, so we can go all the way to now, and that'll show the 25th. And this is where I started recording again a while back, and that's where we're at. So now the other thing is I can look at relationships. I can say, what is this related to? Well, this is related to an API REST account here that we also did some stuff. And this is the REST API itself, right? This is the deployment. So I can look at changes on this as well. So you have a good idea of what's going on when did it happen, and what were the changes made. All right, I'm gonna pop out here real quick, make sure we don't have any questions. Doing okay, good. All righty. So the second thing I can look at is the compliance timeline. And the compliance timeline, let's get something a little more interesting that maybe shows some non-compliance. And we'll go back to that other one. All right, so this one's my stage here. Yep, this is my stage. So let's go to the compliance timeline. Okay, so you can see that, yeah, it was non-compliant. I removed some stuff, and on September 2nd, we had a problem. That's where it went into non-compliant. So with this, now I've got data, right? I've got data. I can come in here and say, what did we go back to our resources, we go back to our dashboard, and we can say, what is going on? What are the resource types that I'm recording on? And remember, I set everything. So I'm recording 286 resources. I would probably, depending on what you're doing, but if you're just a serverless house, or if you're pretty limited, like I said, I would limit that up. All right, so the next thing I want to touch on real quick, and we're just going to talk about this a little bit, is remediation. Okay. Now, I don't have any remediation built into this, and we're not going to build any today because there's a couple of options we can take. And I hope to show this next time. Building remediation can be a little bit complex because what you're doing is you're doing some automation after the fact to reset that compliancy based on whatever it is you're testing. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Right. So the first way is you can, in CloudWatch, you can set up an event that triggers when there's a non-compliance that's kicked in. And that's probably the way I'll go, and I'll show how we do remediation when we get into the custom events, and we'll add that. But basically what will happen is CloudWatch will be triggered with that non-compliant, and we'll have some matching data. And with that event, I can then trigger a Lambda. I can pump it into InfraBridge. I can do whatever. I can invoke it directly. As a target, and I can take that Lambda and I can reset whatever. So for the case of API Gateway, I could call the API and I can add the execution. Now, you may not want to do that. There may be a reason, why. Hey, I don't want to remediate. I just want to know. And so that way, instead, what our remediation is notification. So we'll send stuff to an SNS topic, or we'll send out emails, something like through SNS. And so that's remediation, where we notify somebody, hey, this is out of compliance and needs to be fixed, right? So very, very useful. The second way you can do it is through SSM, and that's the systems manager. And if you're not familiar with that, that's for here. It's in the name. It's for managing systems, right? And there's automation that can be built in this. So you can actually create an auto remediation that ties into an SSM documentation or document, that will actually, again, also you can trigger the Lambda. I'm probably going to go the route of CloudWatch, because that's what I know best, and I like that. I can get the metrics on it, things like that. But if you're familiar with SSM, you like to do that automation, then you can do a remediation doc on that. So just to get a couple ideas on how to do that. Now, real quick, in the last few minutes we've got here, I want to talk about when and where to apply rules, right? Kind of a methodology on this. Now, remember, let's go back to our API Gateway rule. And you can see here, we're applying this to all API Gateway stage and all API Gateway V2 stage. And this, and we'll see how to launch this in multiple accounts and how to aggregate that in the next week or so. But do I really need to make sure my execution rules are on for my development and staging? Really, I just want those on for my production, right? Maybe I want them on for my staging, I don't know, but for my production. And I could use some tags, and I could say, all right, I'm going to tag my API Gateway with production, and then I could say tag this be production. But my developers may forget to tag that with it. And then I have to build a rule to say, hey, if you're in production, this tag should exist. But how do I identify production? And that's where I want to come back to. So here's, and I talk about this all the time. I would heavily encourage you, production should have its own account. All right. Production should have its own account, possibly multiple regions, things like that, but its own account. And if I do that, then what I can do is I can say, in this one, I'm going to add this rule only to my production accounts. And I could handle that, and we'll talk about some Boolean, much like we did on the previous template, where we did some if main region. I can also pass a parameter that says, is this production? And if it's production, then I want you to add this rule, the API Gateway Logging Rule. Or you may just have a specific template that is just for production. So that would probably be my recommended way of saying, hey, we just want we just want to monitor these stages for execution logs in production, and maybe staging to get some debug. Your the staging should be in its own count as well. And your developers should have their own count as well. Because remember, we're talking serverless mainly here. And so your developers can turn that on if they need to. Say, look, I'm not figuring out what this is, so I'm going to kick on execution logs. I'm going to kick on access logs. And watch in the next few days, I'm releasing a blog on how to troubleshoot API Gateway using access logs. So that, that's very helpful. But and so that would be my recommendation. Put your production on account, then you can apply these config rules as needed based on environment, based on account. I hope that makes sense. We've got a few minutes. If there's any questions, I haven't seen any come in so far. Hopefully maybe this is too dry, or maybe it's just so straightforward. I'll go with that. But with that, if I don't see any questions here in a second, I'm going to go ahead and call it for today. For next week, we are going to be doing, we're going to be talking again more governance, and we're actually this is going to be pretty interesting because we're going to be setting up custom resource rules in AWS Config. Okay. Good. All right. So we got the straightforward. Thank you, DTOV. I appreciate that. You always want to go, oh man, this is so dry, I can't do it. And I get that. Sometimes we have to cover dry content. So, I'll throw in some one-finger stupid tricks to keep it entertaining. Oh, you can't see that. I just did stupid. Here, I'll bring it up. Ready? Here they are. Woo. There you go. So anyway, but yeah, so next week we're going to be talking about, again, like I said, we're going to be talking about the custom resource rules. And this is where we're going to evaluate what's going on and then trigger a Lambda. We're going to watch for changes in a specific resource, and then we're going to trigger a Lambda to evaluate if it's configured correctly. And this is a little complex because we're going to be notified that it's changed, and then we need to make some calls with the Lambda to get that configuration and say, how is that set up? Then we're going to evaluate it, and then at that point, we'll declare it compliant or non-compliant. So thank you, John Walsh. I appreciate that, going with straightforward. And not dry at all. So first of all, we had this one with the race car. John Walsh, thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for watching Session with Sam. We will see you next week, and I am outie. See you later. Have a great day.